get ready to get started with our next forum. If everyone can come back into the auditorium. Next up, we're going to change the format just slightly, ever so slightly. Next up, we only have one candidate, of course, which is our current mayor, Mayor Weiss. The mayor will give an introductory statement. However, the audience will be able to ask questions directly. And while if you don't start with a question, I will start with a question, but hopefully you guys will have questions that you can ask the mayor directly. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to the mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Let me just start out by saying thank you to League for hosting tonight. I always enjoy the opportunity to speak here. You provide an incredible service to our community, and so we're very, very appreciative. I also thank all of you and those who may be listening in the future. Thank you for your interest and taking time out of your busy schedule. I remind myself every day that I work for all of you, and so I look forward to every day getting feedback and learning from you so much about what goes on in our community. So let me just say, for those of you who might not know me well, I've been in Shaker for about almost 30 years, raised two children here with my wife. I'm an attorney by training in private practice for about 12 years, and then about almost 20 years as general counsel for a publicly traded real estate company before I took an early retirement, and that led me to an interesting late career change. Thought about teaching, thought about working for a nonprofit, which I have been involved with for many, many years, many nonprofits for many years. When the opportunity presented itself as our prior mayor stepped down to take a job at Cuyahoga County, creating a vacancy in the mayor's position, I was encouraged and had thought long and hard about whether that might be something I would be interested in doing, and it did provide me an opportunity to meld my three loves in life, which is business, law, and public service. So I was lucky enough for City Council to appoint me in April of 2018. I then ran in November and was pleased that you all chose to retain me as mayor, and I've been mayor ever since. I am running again in November. I know it sounds funny, twice in 12 months, but that's the way it works. I'll be running now for a full 4-year term. The reason I ran and the reason I continue to be involved and run again, I believe I bring the skills, the experience, the knowledge, and the leadership and temperament to continue to lead in our community. I've outlined, many of you have heard this before, but I've outlined a vision for our community and areas of emphasis and focus. So one of the things I think I bring to the community is doing what I say and saying what I do. And so my areas of emphasis have not changed. They have remained as such for the last year and a half in office. And that entails working on economic development, fiscal stewardship, attracting and retaining residents, governmental efficiency, modernization and security, transparency and communications, regionalism, sustainability, and a focus on people. And then I should add that although it's been touched on previously, one of my primary things that we have really spent a lot of time on over the last year and a half is this Forward Together initiative, which combines ongoing discussions between the city, the schools, and the library to deal with some very challenging issues that I foresee that we have in the years to come. And we've started out well, have a long way to go, lots of tough decisions ahead, but I'm very pleased with the progress that we've made. I would say lastly that one of the greatest parts of this job is the opportunity to talk with all of you. And so one of my mantras is to be everywhere all the time and not leave a stone unturned. So I've seen many of you at block parties, at community events, school events, and I've enjoyed the opportunity to learn from you. I do probably 75% listening and 25% answering questions. But it's one of the great things about our community that I've really enjoyed. So with that, I will stop and be happy to answer questions.
Okay, we're taking questions from the audience now. If not, I'll start with some written questions that I have. This is the same as for City Council. What 2 or 3 factors do you see as critical to achieving lasting economic growth for our city?
Thank you. We have, and I'm not going to tell you anything probably that's revolutionary or unique here, but we have some significant challenges that our community faces. We love Shaker. We love the streets and the trees and the homes, but we are an aging community, and we have aging infrastructure, whether it be our sewers, our streets, our homes, and these are challenges that other communities don't have in quite the same way. We have some of the same challenges, and you've heard a little bit about this earlier tonight about loss of revenues. Although with the new budget there is a slight silver lining, but I think in general it's fair to say that over the last few years, state and federal policies have not been particularly favorable to municipalities. They have put us in a position where the domino effect or the trickle down has caused more responsibilities to land on the shoulders of municipalities, and yet at the same time the loss of revenues to provide those services. In particular, the loss of the estate tax and loss of our local government funds from the state. I find it a little ironic that of late people have said, well, isn't it true that the local government fund actually for next year's state budget, doesn't it actually go up? And it does by something like 0.002, which means that there's a couple $1 million more for the entire state. So it's really a drop in the bucket. It's really no change. And in fact, over the last few years, we've seen continued dwindling of state resources. So how do we address those issues? We've done several things. One is to decrease the size of government and reduce our expenses. As most of you know, the size of city government is about 20% less than it was only a few years ago, almost to the point where some residents have said to me, we are in fact worried that we don't have enough staff to do the kinds of things that we want you to do as a municipal government. We unfortunately did have to raise taxes following the economic downturn and the loss of the estate tax. If you're not aware, we lost somewhere between $3 and $5 million a year, which was essentially our source of revenues for all of our, or the lion's part of our capital budget. So we have had to find alternative sources of revenues when we lost the estate tax, just to maintain the level of service that we previously had. So we have infrastructure costs going up, revenues going down. So I'd love to tell you that there's a silver lining or a silver bullet here that would solve all of our problems. The answer is that there is none, or there are plenty of bright people in Shaker that would have already figured that one out. So what do we do? Well, I think it takes a couple different things. One is, and you've heard some of the other candidates talk about this, one is to grow our local economy. As you all know, we were designed primarily as a residential community, not with a very limited commercial and business tax base. We've made great strides with the Van Aken district, and I've made continuing efforts in economic development as really the cornerstone of my administration. We are looking at every corner of the city, not only to support phase 2 and later phases of the Van Aken district, but the west end of town, the Chagrin-Lee corridor, Larchmere, Fairmount Circle, wherever there are commercial opportunities, we are pursuing them. We continue to pursue operating efficiencies. and cost savings as a second prong of our approach. Third, we continue to explore regional and cooperative and collaborative opportunities to provide services more cost-effectively and efficiently. We continue to manage our expenses. We run a very tight ship. We've been very lucky to have a current city council and prior city councils and prior mayors and administrations that have run the city conservatively. So we have maintained our bond rating. We have a reserve that protects us against unforeseen downturns, which we saw a little bit of even this past year. And then finally, we need to continue to pursue all the opportunities we can to raise additional funds, particularly at the federal and state level. And that means lobbying and lobbying hard to try to continue to provide revenues to provide the services that our citizens expect.
Thank you. Uh-huh.
Good question. Let me start by saying thank you for the compliment. And on this one, I jokingly have told several people, when these kinds of events occur, this is when you really appreciate the professionalism and the quality of our directors and our administration. I know, Jerry, I couldn't stand here or sit here and answer your question without acknowledging Jerry Chaikin, our Chief Administrative Officer, who, along with our first responders, public works, police, fire, communications, pulls together an incredible team. We have plans to address these issues, and frankly, I just got out of the way so I didn't cause people to trip over my feet. We have an incredible staff that literally worked around the clock for a number of days. And this is when, frankly, the feedback I have received of the staff has really been terrific. And I will admit that, we're always looking to improve, and we try every day. But it is nice when residents acknowledge when someone does a good job, and they really did in this storm. Particularly considering the unique nature of this particular storm. Depending on where you were on Friday night, it might have looked like just a heavy downpour in one part of our city, and another part of the city, it looked like a tornado was going through. And the answer was both were true. And so it did take a little bit of time, not long, but a little bit of time before we quickly realized that this was more than just a heavy downpouring of rain. Yes, we put a team and an action plan that we have already prepared for these kinds of events in place. And we called in staff who were not on duty, along with the staff that was on duty that evening, to try to address these issues. And you're absolutely right. It was a pretty devastating storm, particularly on the west end of town. When you have, just call a neighborhood of 30 intersections, all down at varying levels, either without power or because trees were down, it took heroic efforts to get us back in shape. But I agree, within 24 hours, you saw incredible improvement, and within 48 and 3 days later, although there's still lots of trees to be removed, we did a pretty terrific job, I must say. As to the cost, we have not tallied that cost yet, partly because it depends a little bit on how you measure it. We still have people and contractors who are helping us, but there certainly will be a cost. We do have a reserve, and we have contingencies in our budget that will address many of those costs, but it's unexpected, and so there's always that strain. I will say, though, just in closing on that question, it is in keeping with the tenor and tone and passion of our community that these kinds of events, and we've had several over the last year and a half since I've been mayor, that truly brings out the best in our community. From residents that brought sweets to our police and fire and public works departments, to neighbors, helping neighbors. It's really pretty amazing. And even in the midst of a devastating and unfortunate event, we have residents who come out and come up with creative ideas like, how can we take advantage of the wood from the trees that have fallen? And how can we use the stump of a 300-year-old tree as an educational tool? I got to tell you, that's what gets you up in the morning, and that's what makes coming to work and working in this community and serving this community so very, very special. So I have to say, over the last last year and a half, we've had some of these challenges, and how we have come together as a community is incredibly heartwarming and something that truly makes us unique and special. So.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Mayor, you mentioned that regionalism is one of your priorities. Can you identify a service or services that you might be interested in sharing with other communities?
Yeah, so let me start by saying a couple things. I think in some corners, I'm not sure people fully appreciate sort of how much we're already doing on a regional basis, partly because it may not be called a regional effort or collaboration, but in fact is a regional approach. So for instance, senior transportation, where you have a non-for-profit that is serving multiple communities. To my way of thinking, that's providing a regional solution to issues on a cost-effective basis. So some of these things, Meals on Wheels is another example where we're providing a service to multiple communities. In other areas, we've been very successful, although I will tell you, it is one of these areas that's easier said than done, and it takes a lot of effort. I give my predecessor, Mayor Lycan, and the current and prior council, the Heights Hillcrest Communications Center, our joint dispatch is probably the flagship example of how 5 communities have come together for police and fire dispatch. But it does not go, it's not just a matter of saying we're going to put it together and we do it and then that's it. There are complications and details to actually making that work effectively. I'll just give you a very, very simple example. Albeit all 5 communities came together for our joint dispatch, the reality is, for instance, some had different radio frequencies. So how do you meld different radio frequencies? How do you bring together dispatchers that have for many years focused on one community and ask them now to provide services to multiple communities? How do you retrain and re-educate dispatchers to provide the same level of service, for instance, in Cleveland Heights that they were providing in Shaker, or vice versa? And so these things take constant efforts. I'm now a member of the board for HHCC, the dispatch, and we meet every other month with our police and fire chiefs to work through a wide range of issues. So these things don't just happen without constant effort. The health department is another example where we essentially outsourced our health department, previously our own health department, and joined Cuyahoga County to provide their services, which is again on a county-wide basis. So in other areas, I will also tell you, I've used the word synthetically. cooperated. So for instance, we have either informal or sometimes more formal understandings with adjoining communities about how we do things so that we aren't, in fact, duplicating efforts. So use fire, for instance. We know what apparatus we think we need. We know what other communities, particularly those in the joint dispatch, we know what equipment they have. We have, in the police area, a joint SWAT team, for instance. So we have done a lot of these things either formally or informally to make ourselves more effective and efficient. But I think their bottom line is we can continue to do more. One of the things that we continue to, that we are always thinking about are, other ways that we might improve. For instance, and sometimes it's externally driven as well as internally driven. We may want to save money internally, but there are also external conditions. So for instance, building inspectors and building commissioners, it has in many ways fallen out of favor as a profession. And so many communities are struggling to fill open positions for building inspectors. And so one of the things we've been kicking around is, could we come up with either a regional or maybe even a county-wide source of providing these kinds of services? I will also tell you that it's not only Shaker that is talking about these issues. Cuyahoga County has for some time. In fact, I was at a meeting this morning where Cleveland State and the Levin School made a presentation about a survey that they had done throughout Cuyahoga County about areas that municipalities thought that collaboration could be more effective, and also to give feedback as to what were the issues that were impediments to collaboration. And again, not a lot of surprises, but some surprises. So for instance, loss of control from many communities is an issue. And I will admit for Shaker, for some people, they are in fact a little worried that they want to make sure that the quality of the services that we are used to in Shaker will continue even if it's done on a collaborative basis. Some are frankly financially driven, and I think that's probably the biggest hurdle to doing some things on an economic development basis. Although I continue to have informal conversations with particularly our adjoining communities, where I do think that is the wave of the future, albeit very, very challenging. How do you attract, for instance, a company to one community, and how do you share revenues? But I will tell you, and we had this happen firsthand, our experience trying to attract a headquarters within the first couple months that I was mayor. There were, we're guessing, I don't know exactly how many, but we're guessing there were between 20 and 30 communities all trying to woo a company to their community. And I made the comment, and I still stand by it, that I would have gladly have given up our, 100% of the opportunity to share in a much lower percentage, but do it on a regional basis. I do think there's a growing recognition that that is something we're going to have to find a way to address. And there are models in other parts of the country, frankly. It's a harder one with 50-plus municipalities in Cuyahoga County. It is a challenge politically, but it's one that we keep working on.
Great, thank you. We have time for one more question. Any more questions? Yes.
Shaker Heights participates in NOPEC, which is sort of the aggregate, electrical distribution, but I just learned today that they provide an option for 100% sustainable energy.
Yes.
Is that something that Shaker Heights is promoting, or is that just an individual decision, or how does that work?
It's a great question, and one that we have been working on and have had success. We try to get the word out, but when we hear questions like that, we know we still have work to do in terms of getting the message out. But let me start by saying that Yes, NOPAC, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is an energy aggregator, and communities can opt in, and you can elect to basically buy your electricity through NOPAC really on a regional or cooperative basis. We have had a very active and vocal group of residents who for many years have advocated to provide, NOPAC provides, I should take a step back, NOPAC provides different options for buying electricity. So you can buy it at a fixed, you can buy it at a variable. There are different options because people may have different opinions about what the future of their energy costs might be. But one of the things that, frankly, Shaker was a leader in working with NOPAC was to provide an all-green option. Now gets a little complicated, and I won't go into the details tonight about how what does really a green option mean. But for a long time, NOPAC had options that included a green component to their rates, but not 100%. So we lobbied with NOPAC, and they now provide that as an option. And so we have been now trying to get that word out. Our sustainability committee, which you've heard a little bit about tonight, has been very active. In fact, we've in fact had residents along with myself, but resident members and council members from, all council members, but particularly from our sustainability committee, actually going to block parties to explain to people that the process is really very simple. Not to oversimplify it, but basically you can just call and say, I would like to switch over from whatever your rate happens to be to the all green. I will admit, though, that it's a little daunting for people to understand and to be able to compare rates. Although the state provides some of that through their on-site online website, it is challenging. But the good news is that the rates are very competitive to be all green, and so we're out promoting it to our community. I will tell you that just as in closing on this topic, that we as a city are also are doing our part. In fact, our streetlights and our buildings now have been all green. In fact, we just signed recently a new contract at a lower rate with an all green component to it, which not only is good, obviously, for the environment, but in case you hadn't heard, or I think it was actually mentioned earlier today, that we are part of the Leads for Cities, one of a handful of communities nationwide to receive a grant to promote how we as a broad-based community can be more sustainable. And that's one of the efforts in our certification for Leads for Cities. So all very exciting, but we will continue to try to get that word out. So thank you for the question, though.
Great. Thank you. Let's give the mayor a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
I apologize if we weren't able to get to your question, but we have to be out of the school auditorium by a certain time. So thank you for coming out tonight and partaking of the League of Women Voters and your local candidates' ideas and thoughts. Thank you. And if you haven't registered to vote, there's some voter registration forms out on the table. Thank you.